The real villains in the story are the parents. His parents were given asylum in Britain 8 years, curiously, after the Rwandan genocide. We don't know by who or for what reason. I'd love to see that information published because I think we deserve to know who made that decision. And they decided to repay the generosity of our excellent country by bringing up Rudakubana with such neglect that he was a constant truant, a violent criminal, a enthusiast of terrorism, and eventually a deranged and gleeful murderer. And currently, his parents are being housed at taxpayer expense in a secure location. I think they should be deported immediately. I think they should be stripped of the British citizenship, and I think they should be returned to Rwanda, where they actually have, according to the Daily Mail, diplomatic ties with the ruling Kagame regime. So I think we could probably broker that deal, but I wouldn't hold my breath for Keir Starmer doing it because he's covered up this story at every single stage.
Sometimes a crime is so barbaric, so horrifying, so subhuman, that it has the ability to change a nation forever. The lives of B.B. King, Elsie Stancombe, and Alice de Silva Aguirre will not be in vain because they must not be in vain. As Brits, we cannot let this happen again. We will not let this happen again. No amount of cover-up from the government, the Prime Minister, the police, and the CPS will make us forget. No amount of censorship from the MSM, which continued in court today, will allow us to forget the horrors of the July 29th murders at the Hart Space in Southport as young girls gathered to celebrate Taylor Swift. The truth must prevail. The unimaginable trauma of that day, well, this is difficult, but it must be imagined. Because otherwise, we will allow our corrupt leaders to continue importing this type of horror into our once great United Kingdom. I truly believe that the dam burst after Southport. No longer were there those cries of don't look back in anger like after the Manchester Arena bombing. Instead, the anger was palpable. The fact Slippery Starmer and Calamity Cooper conspired with the Liverpool police and CPS to keep the details hidden forever smashed a trust in this brand new Labour government, which we know is not on the side of the people. So let me be very clear. Axel Rudakubana is a terrorist who was motivated by an extreme Islam ideology and has practiced his new faith openly behind bars in Belmarsh prison. He was in possession of an Al-Qaeda manual and had been producing ricin. To suggest there was no political motivation behind his act of terror is completely ludicrous. And I note Justice Goose in his sentencing seemed to agree that this should have been considered a terrorist attack. And by the way, this is not a new form of terrorism. Lone wolf Islam extremists have been killing innocent Brits for years. But our elite class looks away. When it was David Ames murdered by an Islam terrorist as a result of Prevent failures, the establishment blamed hurty words on Twitter, targeted at politicians. With Axel Rudakubana, I feel like the MSM have found every possible motivation other than the real one. Most recently, misogyny. But blame has also been cast on Amazon, on social media, Elon Musk, and even Donald Trump. Anything to discuss, or I'd say actually anything not to discuss, what we all know is happening to our country thanks to invasion promoting an ideology that does not believe in our way of life. Even today, Sly News decided to spread its permanent message of diversity being our strength outside of court.
To give communities that confidence back that actually misinformation needs to be tackled, that, you know, neighbours need to stand together and communities really need to come together. You know, diversity is a strength. It's not something that should be feared, and actually we need to unite more in the aftermath of it.
Then they blamed everything else.
With the details that will come out once the hearing gets underway. But what we know so far is the big question about, you know, why wasn't he charged with an act of terrorism? And it's because he didn't fit the framework of terrorism. He didn't subscribe to a particular ideology. What we know so far is that he was reading a wide range of materials. So you couldn't say that it was motivated by an ideology. But you talk about the thousands that are referred to prevent. How many of them have the same background as Rudakubana? Young men, isolated, obsessed with violence. We know we have a problem with knife crime in this country. This is a whole area that, is this not being tackled by a particular organisation? Is it not being seen as its own problem that needs to be addressed? The focus has been so much on terrorism that this is being overlooked.
Because he is a terrorist. Then Sly News revealed they would censor details from court as the cover-up goes on.
It's worth pointing out that some of the detail heard in court that we won't be making public is out of sensitivity to the families.
Yes, I mean, that's basically it. I mean, there's no need, really, and I think most people accept that, for us as broadcasters and our newspaper colleagues to dwell on the acute details of the injuries that were inflicted on such young victims.
Even GB News did the same.
It is incredibly graphic, and we've taken the decision here on GB News not to go into a great deal of detail about exactly what this man did inside that building and what he did to those young girls and the two adults. Suffice to say, it was an absolutely horrific event that unfolded that, of course, we know resulted in the murders of those three young girls.
Well, I'm sorry, I can't and I won't, because I repeat, evil needs to be seen to be believed. So today, Rudakubana shouted like a little baby in court. He was a coward till the end. He deserves to rot in hell for targeting the most vulnerable in society, young girls being looked after by lovely female teachers at a happy Taylor Swift dance class. We learned today that children screamed as Rudakubana chased them around the room, attempting to behead them. One teacher managed to lock herself in the toilet with a young child. Others escaped with blood pouring from their bodies. Leanne Lucas, the dance class teacher who was stabbed herself, recalls the knife plunging into her back as she screamed to the children, "Run away, run away." One mother, the prosecutor revealed, who was waiting outside, managed to grab her daughter and get her into the car. 3 other children also got into that vehicle, one of whom had a bleeding injury to her chest. However, Alice de Silva Aguirre collapsed by the side of the vehicle, badly injured. She later died. Elsie Stancombe had at least 85 sharp force injuries and was pronounced dead at the scene. B.B. King suffered at least 122 sharp force injuries. One survivor was stabbed 32 times. She was seen on CCTV being pulled back into the building by Rudakubana, having almost escaped. The most significant wound to her back penetrated her diaphragm and kidney. One child needs antibiotics for the rest of her life after having her spleen removed. Another 10-year-old survivor suffered 8 stab wounds. The father of one injured girl told the court, "Our daughter has not only experienced the most violent frenzied attack on her body, but she's witnessed so much horror too. Her entire childhood has been destroyed by what she experienced, and although she survived, she now has to carry that with her for the rest of her life. And Rudakubana simply celebrated. The court heard today, he said afterwards, "I'm so glad those kids are dead. It makes me happy. I don't care. I'm fairly neutral. It's a good thing those children are dead." And Rudakubana, to our eternal shame, has actually never shied away from his evil intentions. He was a terrorist hiding in plain sight who was allowed to kill. The prosecutor revealed in court that on October the 4th, 2019, nearly 5 years before the attack, that Rudakubana had contacted Childline and asked, "What should I do if I want to kill somebody?" He then brought a knife to school 10 times. That same month, he was asked why he had done so, and he replied matter-of-factly, "To use it." I repeat, he was a terrorist hiding in plain sight who was allowed to kill. There were 3 referrals to prevent. In November 2019, one was made because the defendant had been researching school shootings during an information technology class. In February 2021, another referral made following reports that he had uploaded to Instagram 2 images of Colonel Gaddafi. And in April 2021, a referral made because he had been found researching the London Bridge terror attack. The victim impact statements today were heartbreaking and tragic. Leanne, the hero dance teacher, read her own, saying, "There was a long period of time after the incident where I felt I had no trust in society. For Alice, Elsie, BB, and the surviving girls, I'm surviving for you." A 14-year-old survivor told the court via video link, "Give me a reason for what you did. Arming yourself with a weapon and stabbing children. I hope you spend the rest of your life knowing we think you're a coward." Alice's parents said, "We kept our hopes up every second during Alice's 14-hour fight. But once she had lost her fight, we lost our lives. Our life went with her. He took us too. 6 months of continuous pain and a lifetime sentence. That's what we got then and the life we live now. Our dream girl has been taken away in such a horrible, undeserving way that it shattered our souls." And I'll finish by sharing the words of Jenny Stancombe, the mother of murdered 7-year-old Elsie Stancombe, which was read by the prosecutor saying the family had lost their best friend through an act of pure evil. And then Elsie's mum added, "You deliberately chose that place, fully aware that there would be no parents present, fully aware that those girls were vulnerable and unable to protect themselves. This was not an act of impulse, it was premeditated. You chose that place, that time, and those circumstances, knowing that when we arrived, all we would see was the aftermath of the devastation caused. We were robbed of the opportunity to protect our girls. If we had been there, this would never have happened, and the outcome would have been vastly different. What you did was not only cruel and pure evil, it was the act of a coward." Now, let me bring in Connor Tomlinson. Connor, a 52-year sentence, but no death penalty, no whole life sentence, because He was 17 years old at the time of the terrorist attack, and I will call it that. Is that really good enough?
No, the prospect that this monster, who is incapable of remorse and relished in the murder of 3 children and the attempted murder of many more, the prospect that he can get out even age 70 is an injustice to the families, because those grieving parents, they will grow old. Their children will not, but they will grow old paying taxes and abiding by the law, while this man is housed with bed and board, and he can consort with all sorts of other freaks inside the walls of whatever dark oubliette that is not torturous enough for him that they decide to house him in. I think it's an injustice visited on the families that he is even still alive and they must pay for it. And that's why I've seen calls by Rupert Lowe, Lee Anderson, and even Suella Braverman reconsidering her anti-death penalty position to return the death penalty and give it to Rudakubana. I think if there was ever a worthy candidate, it's him. And I've seen people suggest that Reform get on promoting the idea of a vote in Parliament on it, because we used to have an annual referendum on returning the death penalty, and we scrapped it because every MP voted no pretty much every single time, despite a large portion of the public supporting the death penalty for terrorists. I think it was 64% the last time it was polled. And I think that around this time, support will surge for that. If you don't mind, Dan, I'd like to pick up on some points in your opening monologue, which was fantastically detailed. So I think there's some extra details here that people might be interested in regarding Rudakubana's motive and the villains of the story. So as for his motive, obviously we have the allegation that he was attending mosque in Belmarsh prison, and he seems to have a fixation on Al-Qaeda and ISIS, having ISIS materials downloaded on his personal tablet, and the third prevent referral being related to ISIS. He was looking up how to make self-driving car bombs according to an ISIS manual, so that was quite interesting. And also he was looking at the 2024 Sydney church stabbing perpetrated by a suspected Islamist, but we're not sure about the exact identity because that man was also under the age and hasn't had his identity disclosed yet. However, I think the motivation here is also bound up with anti-white racism. And I think that's a very uncomfortable conversation for the ruling class to have. But found in his possession in his home were the following books: A Place Under Heaven, Amerindian Torture and Cultural Violence, The Mau Mau War, British Counterinsurgency in Colonial Kenya, Death and Survival During the 1994 Genocide in Rwanda, I wonder if there's any family ties there, Examination of Punishments Dealt to Slave Rebels in 2 18th century British plantation societies, and Before the Poison Had Been Far Spread, about 18th century British plantations in Antigua and South Carolina. So it seems like he was nursing a particular ethnic hatred for the English here, for colonial expeditions in Africa. And I must wonder whether or not his school curriculum encouraged that anti-white racism, given the materials that are shared with children at this time. And we know that this was the case and shared with school children before people decide to blame his attempt to bring in a knife to revenge himself on alleged bullies on some sort of bigotry by his classmates. His classmates have reported that he called for white genocide during a football match, and one official who dealt with his case while he got constant referrals to prevent, and the police said he was absolutely obsessed with genocides. He can name every genocide in history and how many people were killed: Rwanda, Genghis Khan, Hitler. It's all he wanted to talk about. So this brings me to the 2 villains in the story. First of all is prevent. Now, you said this time there are no don't look back in anger narratives. For those who don't know, I would urge they read my reporting on this. Don't Look Back in Anger was a slogan concocted by the Home Office while the bodies of the Manchester Arena bombing children were still warm, to tell the public not to be mad about the fact that they'd imported an Islamist into their midst. It was something called controlled spontaneity, where in the aftermath of terror attacks, the government directed the media response to contain public outrage, particularly about Islam, because there is a 700-strong Muslim activist network running the Home Office, and they have an outsized amount of influence over Raiku. Now, Raiku is the parent body of Prevent. Of course, he was referred to Prevent 3 times, and Prevent thought that he didn't meet the criteria for terrorism because he didn't have a clearly defined ideology, and he was just obsessed with nebulous violence. Now, this has become the majority of Prevent referrals. It's about 50%, according to William Shawcross's report. And this is because after a long and successful campaign by jihadist group, now proscribed, Hizb ut-Tahrir, the Home Office has refused to focus on Islamist extremism, and Islamist extremism has now dropped below far-right extremism. Far-right, by the way, per the list of far-right texts they were found to be looking at includes Douglas Murray, Peter Hitchens, and George Orwell's 1984.
Yeah.
So they can't even
Jacob
define it
Rees-Mogg.
properly. Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
They
quite.
actually investigated him as a
Yeah,
minister.
well, I spoke to a Home Office former civil servant, I think it's Department of Trade, who was investigated by Prevent for having a picture of Jacob Rees-Mogg in his office while working for the government at the time. So you can tell where they've got their priorities straight. And what's interesting is members of this Home Office Islamic network, members of Prevent, did a seminar in early 2024, I think it was January, after the Shawcross report. And they said that Shawcross was completely non-credible because he would call anyone who isn't looking at Islamism myopically woke. And then this particular one civil servant said that Prevent is systemically racist or inherently racist because it focuses on Islamist extremism. And then later on, when an ISIS video played in the seminar, she pointed at one of the ISIS fighters and said, "I know him. He went to my school." So these are the kind of people that are setting the priorities for Prevent. This was published in The Spectator, by the way. So this is, all official information. So the other villain in this story, as well, as we've mentioned, Rudakubana had a 1% attendance rate to the subsequent school after he was kicked out of his original one for bringing a knife 10 times. He was stopped a week before the actual massacre by his dad from committing another massacre at his old school. The real villains in the story are the parents. His parents were given asylum in Britain 8 years, curiously, after the Rwandan genocide. We don't know by who or for what reason. I'd love to see that information published because I think we deserve to know who made that decision. And they decided to repay the generosity of our excellent country by bringing up Rudakubana with such neglect that he was a constant truant, a violent criminal, a enthusiast of terrorism, and eventually a deranged and gleeful murderer. And currently, his parents are being housed at taxpayer expense in a secure location. I think they should be deported immediately. I think they should be stripped of their British citizenship, and I think they should be returned to Rwanda, where they actually have, according to the Daily Mail, diplomatic ties with the ruling Kagame regime. So I think we could probably broker that deal, but I wouldn't hold my breath for Keir Starmer doing it because he's covered up this story at every single stage.
Absolutely. And there's been no focus, by the way, on Axel Rudakubana's father's links with the former Rwandan regime, which is clearly a significant part of the story. And Connor, you have written for Ayaan Hirsi Ali's Courage Media on this, what radicalized Rudakubana. And I think it is fascinating. I think you're completely right to say that the mainstream media are looking away from those obvious points. And those obvious points are, yes, anti-white racism, and yes, also an Islam extremism motive. But what was so shocking today, and we'll take a look at a clip that you pointed out on X, but I want you to set it up first, is that the mainstream media that had already admitted that they were going to censor the trial decided to bring on the executive from the Liverpool Muslim Council to say what?
Yes, this was Tawhid Islam, a name that almost feels like a sick joke, a man that they brought on during the Southport riots to say that, oh, I'm so fearful of the broader Southport community now because they might be Islamophobic, because of course Muslims are the real victims in the murder of these girls. And he decided to say two things. He said, why are we talking about terrorism when this is really just about male violence against women? And then he went on to say, of all days, this, diversity is our strength.
Well, let's have a look at that, Connor. I mean, it's hard to believe that this interview took place as the evidence was being delivered inside the Liverpool Crown Court. But look at this. But first, the reason you're watching this show is because you know that these days it's almost impossible to trust the mainstream media or the so-called fact checkers who claim to patrol social media. And I mean, that's for a very good reason, given what we've seen today with the Southport Massacre, or Brexit, or COVID, or the demonization of Donald Trump. So I have the solution. Today's sponsor, Ground News, created by a former NASA engineer to provide you with the only safe way to consume the headlines. Go to ground.news/outspoken to check it out for yourself. But I want to actually show you, the best thing to do here is show you this incredible website and app in action. So what we're going to do is take the recent story of Elon Musk's fallout with Nigel Farage over Tommy Robinson, which the left-wing legacy media tried to whip up to destroy all three men. And you can see very clearly on Ground News, which collates the 230 sources all in one place. And it instantly shows how the story is being covered by the media, broken down whether those media organizations lean left or right, illustrated by this bias distribution service. And then if you scroll down, you can see every article about the topic broken down by the political position and ownership of the publication. So in this case, you can see quite clearly that Fox News gave a fair analysis compared to Mediarite and The Independent, which most certainly did not, lambasting the men as morons with big egos, actually looking into why, without actually looking into why, why the split happened, how it could be resolved. But what's more is Ground News actually gets to know you personally, providing you with the news stories you're interested in, while also analysing your own biases and coming up with potential blind spots you may not have heard about. And I know if you're like me, you love the news, but you don't trust the legacy media. So Ground News gives you the tools to understand the truth about what is going on in the world. I can tell you it is the only way. I read the news now. I have the app on my phone and allows me to see through media bias and manipulative narratives. No more relying on MSM bias to define the truth for you. So go to ground.news/outspoken to check it out. You can subscribe through my link for 40% off the Vantage plan, which is what I use for unlimited access. Thank you, Ground News. And remember, Ground News is subscriber funded, and supporting it also supports my work too. So for less than a Netflix subscription, you can get all the world's news in one place and think for yourself. It's been a game changer for a news junkie like me. So that is ground.news/outspoken. But now back to the show.
Actually, misinformation needs to be tackled, that, neighbours need to stand together and communities really need to come together. Diversity is a strength. It's not something that should be feared, and actually we need to unite more.
So it's all the same stuff, Connor.
Yeah, it's not to be feared. Tell that to Elsie, Alice, and Bibi. Bibi was nearly decapitated, by the way. So this is just the most grotesque sort of thought.
But he wasn't finished. But he wasn't finished there, Connor, because you actually discovered another clip of this madness. And by the way, this was even after people had pointed out to Sly News, what the hell are you doing giving this guy a platform today? Watch this.
And you raised it before we began speaking here live on air, that this was an act of violence against girls, girls and young women. And that needs to be talked about more, because we talk about, was this terrorism, was this not terrorism? This was violence against women and girls, which in the main, and we talk about it so much here on Sky News, needs to be taken more seriously.
It does, and I feel that it's not being talked about enough. He did target a girls' dance class, and we hear more and more in the media about violence against women and this perpetuation of violence against women. And why aren't we having serious discussions about that? Like saying, we're talking about...
Why does it have to be classed as terrorism
exactly,
for it to be dealt with appropriately?
Exactly. Why are we talking about terrorism and extremism all the time? Why aren't we talking about why was a girls' dance class targeted? Why are women being targeted? And why are some of the most violent acts being committed against women across all communities? And that discussion doesn't seem to be being had at the moment, and it's worrying that this is being allowed to just play out in a way that isn't getting to the fundamentals of what happened. That's who he targeted, and it needs to be talked about openly, and hard questions need to be asked.
Connor, why on earth are we talking about extremism? Why on earth are we talking about terrorism? I mean, to give a man like that the platform on a day like this, I'm sorry, it shows how corrupted our media have become. I've been so furious watching all of the reports on the British Bashing Corporation as well, saying, oh no, there was absolutely no sign of motive. How utterly ridiculous. There was just as much of a motive as the guy who murdered Joe Cox in a cold-blooded terrorist attack, who had white supremacy material on his phone. Now, for good reason, no one in the mainstream media had a moment's doubt about describing him as a white supremacist. So why the hell do they have a moment's doubt describing Axel Rudakubana as an Islam extremist? He had converted quite clearly.
I think the moment of doubt is purposeful. This reeks again of Raiku's controlled spontaneity, because anytime there is a terror attack, for example, the 2017 London Bridge attack that Rudakubana became fixated on, they bust out 100 imams to the site to read off a declaration that this had nothing to do with the religion of peace. And so I think this is inviting a community leader on to do what my friend Ayaan Hirsi Ali would call dawa, which is the advancement of Islam as an ideology by inserting themselves into tragedies and purporting to speak on behalf of the broader community and say, well, to prevent these from happening in future, you have to accede to our demands, which is bringing the community together, fighting Islamophobia, etc. And this is a classic case, a disgusting case, of distracting via second-order issues. This is why newspapers have been trying to call him the Amazon killer, as if Jeff Bezos is at fault, as if a knife appeared through the internet, like the blade in Macbeth, settled in Rudakubana's hands and compelled him to stab children. They've been trying to say it's online harms, as they did with David Amos's murder, when purportedly his friends, MPs, got up the next day and didn't blame the Islamist extremist Ali Harbi Ali, who again failed to follow up after one meeting. Instead, they decided David's law should be passed, cracking down on mean tweets as if he'd been killed by an email. And we're seeing the exact same thing go on here. And now they want to move it onto the safer ground of, well, it's just men versus women. And it feeds into the contemptible man-hating feminist ideology of the likes of Yvette Cooper and Jess Phillips, who constantly would prefer to demonize all men, because if they were to talk about which men are more likely to commit these heinous crimes against women, well, it would be very uncomfortable for their politically correct multicultural narrative now, wouldn't it?
Thank you so much for watching Dan Wootton Outspoken. Please click on my face just to the bottom left to subscribe to this brand new independent news source and turn on the notification bell so you'll be alerted to our brand new live shows, uncancelled interviews, and special royal episodes. Outspoken is also now available as a podcast, so you can listen to the show every weekday on the go, wherever you are.